So we're going to talk about Rick Santorum, who most people think is a fundamentalist or an evangelical, but he's not. He's a Catholic, right?
He's a fundamentalist, though. I mean, he still is considered a religious fundamentalist.
But fundamentalist, you really think Protestant?
Generally, yeah, but I mean, every faith has them, you know? I think that when people talk about, oh, religion's responsible for all the war and oppression of women and violence, and it's like, no, not religion. Far right-wing fundamentalism. The overwhelming majority of liberal or moderate Christians, Jews, and Muslims are getting along just fine right now. It's the right-wing Christians, Jews, and Muslims that are going to continue to make life very interesting for the rest of us. And
Right.
Rick Santorum is part of that club.
Now, what part of Catholicism would Rick Santorum fall under? Ignorant?
No, he would fall under fundamentalism.
I mean, is there, like, your father was a Franciscan?
Yeah.
Do they have a special sect of Catholics?
No, any religion has its conservative and its liberal adherents. And, you know, every person who's religious picks and chooses the parts of their holy books they want to believe in. It's all buffet spirituality. I mean, everyone does it. It's just that when you do it to justify being mean to someone, you got to put your foot down. And for me, there's 5 things that make you a fundamentalist. Number 1, the gay hating. Muslims, Jews, Christians, they all have that in common. Number 2 is women are second-class citizens. According to the Bible, women are not allowed to speak in the temple. When a woman is menstruating, she's unclean. If you touch a woman while she's menstruating, you're unclean in the eyes of God.
Tell me about it.
So watch who you bump elbows with in the Kotex aisle.
Or something.
Yeah. Number 3 is violence is okay because we're doing it for God. So violence, we get a pass on violence. And again, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, fundamentalists, they think violence is great. Other religions are inferior. That's point 4. Point 5, the sex hang-up thing. And I find that those 5 things link fundamentalists no matter what the faith is. And so I think we need to take all the fundamentalist Christians, Jews, and Muslims who send other people off to die for them, put them in Australia, put it all on pay-per-view, let them fight it out to the death with polo mallets and pool cues, and put it on pay-per-view and fix the deficit.
Wow.
Yeah, but you know, Rick Santorum is probably the biggest religious hypocrite running for president on the GOP side, even bigger than Gingrich.
Even bigger than Gingrich.
Even bigger than
Now,
Gingrich,
Gingrich, Frank, help me out here. Gingrich converted to Catholicism.
Yeah, because we needed to have a creepier religion.
And but what kind of Catholic is he, Frank?
He's a cafeteria Catholic.
Cafeteria.
He's an unlimited buffet cat.
Well, if you read Rabelais in Pantagruel and Gargantuan, I remember years ago reading it, and the word fundament means shit. Around
So that's why Santorum fits right in.
fundamentalists, I would assume the origin of the word fundamentalist is somebody who believes shit. Fundament means shit.
A fundament sounds like a delightful thing you'd get at Chuck E. Cheese or something.
See, fundamentalists don't think they're better than you. They think God thinks they're better than you. And that's the problem. And that's why they're so fun and charming. And that's why you can't argue with them, because they can't be wrong. They're on the side of God. So if you're disagreeing with them, you represent Satan. And I am not going to sit down with Satan and discuss school curriculum or who gets to get married.
Great. Now, here's my question. And I've tried to do this, but being who I am, it doesn't work. Why can't we take the side of God? Why can't we wear God on our sleeves? The Catholic Church is against the war. They're against capital punishment.
Yeah.
They're for universal health insurance. Why can't liberals accuse the conservatives?
They do. They just don't get on TV talking about it. That's why I try to put it in the form of a dick joke so I can get on television to talk about these things. Because unless you make it funny, no one wants to hear from you. Because all you get on TV of religion is atheists and imbeciles. I just perform for the New York City Atheist Society, and I have a lot more in common with them than a lot of religious folk, and I'm a believer. But, you know, the Catholic Church was opposed, both the last 2 popes, both opposed to the Iraq War. So I really want to hear Gingrich and Santorum talking about Bush-Cheney's war on religion. I mean, these guys defy the church all the time. You pointed out as national health care.
Why doesn't Wolf, full of fundament Blitzer, during a debate, ask them that?
Well, number 1, because they're not too swift. Number 2, the media is as liberal as the corporations that own it. You know, a couple of years ago in 2008, during the last presidential campaign, there was a debate on CNN, and Anderson Cooper asked Mike Huckabee about the death penalty, saying, you know, you're Christian, but you really like killing sinners. Do you think Jesus would have supported the death penalty? And Huckabee just goes, Anderson, Jesus was too smart to ever run for public office. And the whole crowd cheers at that cunning comeback dodge, and Anderson Cooper moves on to the next question. So what I'm saying is I don't think you should never cheat on anybody, but if you're dating Anderson Cooper and you decide to have an affair, the guy doesn't ask tough follow-up questions. Just keep that in mind.
Well, none of them do, but
and Jesus
was a victim of capital punishment.
If there was no death penalty, he'd still be here, you know? Who could forget what he said, forgive us our trespasses as we lethally inject those who trespass against us. Like, he was the most anti-death penalty guy of all time.
And
but that's the irony of America. You know, Carlin said we were founded by slave owners who wanted to be free. You can't be president unless you're a follower of Jesus who believes in killing the sinner. And
now,
you want to talk big government, strapping a guy down to a table and murdering him doesn't get more intrusive of the state than that.
Yes.
So the fundamentalist then, and this is what I think is unfair, the fundamentalist then quotes the Old Testament when you talk about...
Yeah, usually about what? About gays?
No, about capital punishment.
Yeah. Well, they'll try to quote Jesus out of context.
Well, okay, so now I'm arguing with you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm a right-wing lunatic, and I'm for capital punishment because Jesus said so. How do I justify it as an illiterate? How do I quote the Bible?
Eye for an eye.
Eye for an eye, which is Old Testament.
Which Jesus directly references and refutes in the Sermon on the Mount.
And that was just a reference to the Bethlehem lens crafters.
That's true, in fact. That's true.
So... so help me.
Or those who live by the sword will die by the sword. That's used a lot to justify the death penalty. But Jesus was saying that to be nonviolent when the jackbooted thugs of the state came to arrest him, and his followers who were bearing arms wanted to fight back against these jackbooted thugs, and that's when Jesus said, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. He was saying that in the context of be nonviolent.
Absolutely.
But it's often taken out of context to make it sound like he was in favor of, killing people and shit.
Is there anything in the New Testament, did anybody say it was okay to kill prisoners?
Not Jesus.
What about Paul? What about...
Paul's an interesting guy because Paul is a pretty uptight guy. And a lot of theologians actually believe that Paul was a closeted gay man in the first century Holy Land, because why would he have all these sex hang-ups? Paul's a guy who can be so accepting and forgiving and loving of all these horrible sinners, but when it comes to his own unholy flesh and its vile urges, he's disgusted. And when
turns out the road to Damascus was a brown dirt highway. Is what you're saying.
Well, it's and the ramble on the side of the road. So Paul was just in general an uptight guy.
But does he say anything?
About the death penalty? I don't think so, but he might.
Well,
he sure talks about slaves.
But isn't it true that when Jesus was crucified, that news was overtaken by rumors that Paul was dead?
Yes, that Paul is dead. If you read the scroll backwards, it says that.
So if I were to talk...
I had to do a Beatles joke for John.
All right, so if I'm talking to Pat Robertson, he could dig up something from the New Testament that would justify...
the death penalty?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, he married my cousin, actually, Pat Robertson. He actually performed...
Cliff Robertson.
Performed my cousin's... no, he hit on my wife once. No, Pat Robertson performed my cousin's wedding.
Hold it.
Tina Merrill.
Cliff Robertson hit on your wife?
Yes, before she was my wife.
Really?
He was just flirting. He was a nice guy. Well, I did an award show with him once in New York, and it was a big thrill to meet
David
Charlie.
Beagleman borrowed my pen to kite some checks.
This is the weirdest show I've ever
There are like
done in my
two
life.
people who are going to get that reference. And
They're both here.
and they're both Dina Merrill was married to Cliff Robertson, and they went after David Beagleman, who kited checks and it almost destroyed their career.
I want to hear you say some ignorant fundamentalist thing that I can try to refute and impress you.
Capital punishment is a Old Testament idea, not a New Testament idea. What about homosexuality?
Now?
Okay.
After the show?
Well, that's that as well. That is also an Old Testament idea.
Is there anything in the New Testament that says a man shall not lie down with another man?
Yes, well, there not really, no, but there is one area that's commonly taken out of context in Paul's letter to the Romans. And I was just on the radio last Friday, and some guy called up and tried to throw this at me, where it said that Paul talking in the past tense about Sodom and Gomorrah and saying how God gave them over to unnatural affections and men burned with desire for each other. And people have used this, and women burned, and women turned away from their natural lusts to be into each other. It's actually
sounds
funny
hot
that
to me.
at no point in the Bible does God ever forbid women with women. So God and Vivid Video have the same policy. But
by the way,
that quote of Paul I'm just pointing out was completely taken out of context, because in that sense, it's not God punishing them for being gay. It's God making them gay as punishment. It said God gave them over to unnatural affections, meaning whatever you're normally into, you're not into. And we got to remember back then, the Roman Empire, it was Caligula on a pogo stick. Everybody was bi. If you were a man who didn't sleep with men, there was something wrong with you. And these Orthodox Jews who wrote the books that turned into the Bible really weren't into that, but they knew what was going on. And there's the great story of Jesus healing the Roman centurion's slave that I think is the biggest evidence that Jesus was pro-gay. But the one part of the New Testament, which is Paul's letter to Romans, that they use is completely out of context. And it's God making people gay as punishment because, that's God. It's funny that way. So, but the centurion story is really kind of cool because did you ever see Jesus of Nazareth, the Zeffirelli's film, where Jesus is played as a blue-eyed British Xanax addict? Ernest Borgnine plays the centurion in the movie. And the centurion comes up to Jesus and says, "Hey, my slave is dying. Will you come to my house and help him out and take a look at the guy?" And Jesus is like, "Absolutely." And the apostles all flip out. And they're like, "Rab, these motherfuckers, they're occupying our land, and they're the Roman Empire. How dare you?" And Jesus is like, "Shit, y'all, that's what I do." I paraphrase from the Aramaic, but Jesus is like, "This guy has more faith than you. He walks right up to me and asks for help, and these are Romans." It's a nice little story, and you think, oh, Jesus is so cool. He's even being loving to the occupying European army that's colonized the Middle East. But when you read the Greek translation, they don't use the word slave. They use the word pais, P-A-I-S, beloved boy. And when you think about it, historically, what do we know about the Romans? We know they left their wives at home when they went on the road, and they brought their teenage boys with them. And that's how you were broken in, and you grew up and had one of your own. And we see this continue today in Afghanistan with the culture of the Bakabas, of boy lovers. They're the biggest homophobes in the world, but to them it's not gay because it's not for love, it's just sex. And that's why I always say that, you look at this pedophilia, that's not a Christian thing, that's a Roman thing. That's a little bit of the old-time Roman Empire kept alive behind those walls.
In that movie with Ernest Borgnine had a gay superior named Leadbottom.
That's true.
And he was
with biggest dickus.
another joke that nobody will get.
But there's an example of Jesus being pro-gay, and when you think about it, the fact that the apostles flipped out so much makes a lot more sense when you consider that these are Orthodox Jews, and here's Jesus healing this guy's male lover. So Jesus, pretty cool guy, big rainbow flag.
I don't think Jesus would have gone to help if he'd known that he'd married Ethel Merman.
Well, that's true.
That's right.
Heal her face.
There's no business like Messiah business. There's no.
Ernest Borgnine was married to
Ethel Merman. That's
Eugene
right.
Merman. Wasn't it Eugene Merman?
No, Ethel Merman.
Oh, okay.
Eugene. He did have an affair with Eugene Merman as well.
I get the two confused. I've never met Eugene. So
that's my big boring gay thing.
No, I want to talk about now the big thing.
It's Leviticus is where they get all the homophobia from. But yeah, go ahead. What's the big thing?
Well, tell me about Leviticus.
Well, Leviticus is where it says, "Ye shall not lie with a man as with a woman. That is an abomination." It doesn't say anything about, one guy on all fours or one guy on his knees or one guy leaning against a men's room stall while a Republican senator plays lookout. Just "you shall not lie with a man." Then,
but it also says, you have to chop off your wife's left hand.
Well, first it says you have to kill gay men. If men sleep together, you have to kill them. And I don't know if the homophobes have noticed, but the gay guys have been working out. They're ready now. Yeah. But, you see the 300? My God, those were some buff gay. That movie was so gay I came out to my parents. But if you believe that, you got to follow all the laws, which mean you have to be stoned to death anybody who works on the Sabbath, and that's Saturday, so bye-bye NASCAR. Anybody who cuts their hair at the temples or tattoos the flesh, so long Marine Corps, and half the bands I like. Any children who are gluttons or drunks, bye-bye Bush twins. And adultery. Any adulterers have to be stoned to death, and that includes in the Old Testament divorce and remarriage. So what this means is you have to kill Newt Gingrich 2 times and kill Rush Limbaugh 3 times if you believe the part of the Bible that says being gay is wrong.
Well,
which you shouldn't do.
Rush Limbaugh is dead inside 4 times, so it's kind of so. And now the big
now he's being lowered onto his wife, and I'm sure it's very romantic.
So you're the only one other than a scene in The West Wing
Oh,
where
God.
Martin Sheen spits back Leviticus at some...
Leviticus, the encyclopedious Leviticus tattooed lady.
He has laws that Jews adore so.
And Mary Magdalene was a whore. Was Mary Magdalene the whore?
No. At no point in the Bible is Mary Magdalene described as a prostitute.
Who's the prostitute?
There's a couple of them, and there's a couple of adulteresses too, but at no point is Mary Magdalene
Why do we
described.
think Mary Magdalene is a prostitute?
Because the men who wrote the Bible wanted us to think that. And you can read the Da Vinci Code to get some cool fan fiction on that. But
They left out the name of Trixie and a couple other girls.
yeah. No, she was an apostle, and people think she was married to Jesus. You know, there were 15 apostles. They say there were 12 apostles, but that's because they don't count women as people. There's 3 women that went everywhere with Jesus and those 12 guys, but we say there were 12 apostles and 3 groupies. Mm-hmm. They sold T-shirts at all the big gigs, you know. So that's all because they hate women, and they don't think women are worthy of being priests, and they should hate God for making 51% of the world so unworthy of the priesthood.
Well, the story of how the world came to be, Adam and Eve, that's like a parable about how horrible women
That's
are.
all
right?
totally. It's all about how horrible women are, and it's like, so a talking snake tricks Eve into eating an apple like it's Alan Funt. You know, there's nothing more hilarious than biblical characters caught in the act of being
We thought it
themselves.
would be really funny.
We put our own Joanne Flug dressed up as a serpent to offer Eve an apple. Now she thinks she's going to eat of the tree of life and gain eternal knowledge, but what she's really doing is damning herself and all future generations of women to monthly menstruation, painful childbirth, and shitty wages for doing the same work as a man. Now let's go over to Fanny Flag with our candid kids.